Hello everyone. 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. This is Jiwon and you are listening to Understanding Korea one story at a time. If you are new here, a quick roadmap of what we are doing. Every month, I run a K-book uncover series where I take one important Korean book that is not yet available in English and walk you through it chapter by chapter with context, stories, and a lot of feelings. This month's book is 유시민's 나의 한국 현대사, My History of Contemporary Korea, a very human history of how modern Korea was built out of war ruins, dictatorship, and stubborn hope. There was no way to fit all of that into 1 week, so I split this book into 4 parts. On the newsletter, on this podcast, we are spending 4 weeks with Yu Shi-min as our guide. Today is part 3 of that journey. In the newsletter, this week's essay is titled Two Desires, One Nation, Part 3, The City That Would Not Stay Silent. In that piece, we walked through the big turning points of the 1980s. Gwangju, Park Jong-cheol's torture and death, Lee Han-yeol's blood-stained Yonsei University t-shirts, and the June uprising with its necktie troops of office workers. Here on the podcast, I want to do something a little different. I want to talk about something I wish I could have gone deeper on in my newsletter, but didn't have a space for. So in this podcast, I will talk about buchae-gam, a Korean word that has no clean English translation, and why understanding it is the key to understanding not just the 1987, but also why Korean democracy looks the way it does today. Stick around. This one is going to get personal. Okay, let's start with a language problem. buchae-gam. If you Google translate it, you will get sense of that or feeling indebtedness. But that's like translating 정 as affection or 한 as sadness. Technically correct, but it misses the whole depth of what the word actually means. Here is what buchae-gam actually means. It's the feeling that you owe someone something because they suffered and you didn't, and that debt can only be repaid through action. It's not guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. It's not survivor's guilt. That's passive, paralyzing. buchae-gam is active. It's a moral obligation that propels you forward. In this book, the concept of buchae-gam runs through every chapter about the 1980s. Yu Shi-min describes how the 1980s generation carried the weight of Gwangju, how they couldn't forget, how they felt they had to act, not just out of anger, but out of obligation, not ideology, not class consciousness, not even anger alone, debt. Why this matters more than rage? Think about it this way. Rage burns hot and fast. You can be furious about an injustice for a week, a month, maybe a year. Then it fades. You get tired. You move on. But that doesn't go away. You carry it. It sits in your chest. It wakes you up at 3 a.m. It whispers, you are still alive. They are not. What are you going to do about it? Yu Shi-min writes about the students who were in Gwangju in May 1980, the ones who were in Seoul, Busan, or abroad. When they found out what happened, they didn't just feel angry. They felt indebted. I should have been there. I wasn't. I'm alive because I got lucky. Now I owe them. And here is the thing about moral debt. You can't pay it back to the person you owe. They are gone. So you pay it forward. You pay it by making their death mean something. In my newsletter, I wrote about the iconic photo of Lee Han-yeol being carried on his classmate Lee Jong-chang's back after being hit by a tear gas canister on June 9, 1987. I wrote about Lee Chang-sung, the 중앙일보 photo editor who defied the government censorship to run it on the front page on June 11th. But let me tell you more about what Yu Shimin describes in his book. Yu Shimin writes that on June 10, 1987, the day after Lee Han-yeol was shot, approximately 500,000 people poured into the streets across the country. The photo wasn't just news, it became a symbol. People saw that image, a young student in his Yonsei University t-shirt, bleeding, being carried by his friend, and something broke open inside them. Because it could have been anyone's son or daughter, anyone's classmates, anyone's younger brother or sister. Yu Shimin describes how that photo traveled, not just in newspapers, but photocopied, passed hand to hand, posted on university bulletin boards, smuggled into factories. Within 48 hours, that photo was everywhere. The regime tried to control the narrative. They said Lee Han-yeol was a radical student. They said the protests were communist instigated. But the photo told a different story. It said, "This is what they do to our children." And that message, combined with the memory of Gwangju, combined with the torture death of Park Jong-chul, created an unstoppable momentum. Okay, so let me talk about necktie troops. On June 15 and 16, 1987, something unprecedented happened. Office workers, salarymen, walked out of their offices in downtown Seoul, especially around Myeongdong, and joined the students' protesters. Yu Shimin writes that on June 16, about 1.5 million people protested across the country, and a significant portion of them weren't students. They were people in dress shirts and ties. This was a huge deal because up until that point, the regime could always say, "It's just the radical students, normal people support us." But when tens of thousands of ordinary office workers started chanting 독재 타도, down with the dictatorship, well, the narrative collapsed. Why did they do it? Yu Shimin describes the atmosphere at the time. These weren't seasoned activists. They were ordinary office workers, people who had mortgages, kids in school, jobs to protect. So why did they risk it? Because by June 1987, the accumulation of injustices, Gwangju, Park Jong-chul, Lee Han-yeol, had reached a breaking point. And people felt, if I don't act now, I'm complicit. That's the essence of buchae-gam. Let me take you back to May 1980. In my essay, I called Gwangju a moral earthquake. But let me get more specific about why, based on what Yu Shimin writes. From May 18 to May 27, 1980, Gwangju citizens rose up against the military coup led by Chun Do-hwan. On May 21, paratroopers opened fire on civilians at the Jeonnam-do provincial office. Yu Shimin writes, at around 1 p.m. on May 21st, the paratroopers opened fire with M16 rifles and M60 machine guns on citizens gathered in front of the provincial office. 166 plus people confirmed dead, likely many more. But here is the part that haunts me. The rest of South Korea didn't know. The regime cut all phone lines out of Gwangju, blocked all roads, controlled all media. For weeks, Most Koreans believed the government's story. Communist riders attacked the soldiers. Order has been restored. From May 1980 to June 1987, 7 years, Gwangju was a suppressed memory. People in Seoul, Busan, Daegu went about their lives, got jobs, got married, had kids. Meanwhile, Gwangju families buried their dead in silence, threatened into submission. Yu Shimin writes, Gwangju was not just a massacre, it was a hidden massacre, and the hiding might have been worse than the killing itself, because it meant the regime was betting that if they lied long enough, people would forget. But here is the thing about buchae-gam. You can suppress it, but you cannot erase it. By 1987, the truth about Gwangju had leaked out through church networks, through whispered conversations, through underground pamphlets. And when Park Jong-cheol died, when Lee Han-yeol fell, people connected the dots. Oh, this is what they did in Gwangju, and they are still doing it. That realization didn't just make people angry, it made them debtors. Let me tell you about Park Jong-cheol. On January 14, 1987, police arrested him because they thought that he knew where another student activist was hiding. He didn't. They tortured him anyway, held his head underwater in bathtub. Yu Shimin quotes one of the officers later trying to downplay it. We just gave him a little water. 물 조금 먹였을 뿐. Just a little water. Park Jong-cheol drowned in a police station in Seoul on January 14, 1987. He was 21 years old, a linguistics major in Seoul National University. His funeral was held at Myeongdong Cathedral on February 7, 1987. Yu Shimin writes, thousands of people gathered at Myeongdong Cathedral. Students, priests, mothers, workers, everyone came. Why this death mattered? Park Jong-cheol wasn't a revolutionary. He wasn't even particularly political. He was just a quiet kid who liked books. And that's exactly why his death hit so hard. Because they could torture and kill Park Jong-cheol, an ordinary student, then no one was safe. And their realization spread like wildfire. By June 1987, when Lee Han-yeol was shot, people weren't just mourning one student. They were mourning all the students, all the ordinary people the regime had crushed. The 1980s were not just a political struggle. They were a decade in which Koreans learned that survival was no longer enough. Let me unpack that. In the 1950s, Koreans wanted to survive. In the 1960s to 70s, they wanted to grow economically. In the 1980s, they wanted to be treated like human beings. That's the shift buchae-gam created. Because once you feel indebted to the dead, you can't go back to just accepting whatever the regime gives you. You start asking, is this the country they died for? And if the answer is no, you act. Let me bring this back to something you might have seen recently. In December 2024, South Korea was, once again, in the streets. This time it was Yoon Suk-yeol martial law crisis. He declared martial law. It lasted only hours before the National Assembly voted down. But that was enough. Protests erupted. Impeachment followed. And if you watched the news, you saw something striking. Young and old, side by side, holding light sticks, singing, chanting. The same energy as 1987. Different generation, same death. Yu Min writes, history is not made by heroes. It is made by people who refuse to forget. And their refusal? That's buchae-gam. Western media often say that Koreans are passionate about democracy. And sure, true. But that framing misses the why. Because here is the thing. Koreans aren't passionate about democracy in the abstract. They are not out there waving flags because they read John Locke and got inspired. They are out there because real people they know or know of died for it. Park Jong-cheol wasn't a concept. So here is where I will leave you today. buchae-gam is uncomfortable. It's heavy. It doesn't let you move on. But here is what I believe, based on everything Yu Min writes. buchae-gam is also one of the most powerful forces for justice in human history. Because when people feel morally indebted to the past, they don't just accept the present. They build a better future. Not because they are saints, not because they are radical, but because they owe somebody. They are saying democracy doesn't grow in fertile soil. It grows in blood. Park Jong-cheol's blood, Lee Han-yeol's blood, the blood of 166 plus people in Gwangju. Korean democracy didn't fall from the sky. It wasn't given as a gift. It was paid for in bodies, in lives, in sacrifice. And that payment, it's not finished. Every time citizens take to the streets, every time they vote out a leader who threatens democracy, every time they refuse to forget, that's the debt being paid forward. That's buchae-gam in action. And in Korea, that debt is still being paid. If you want the full written version with all the photos and historical context, check out this week's newsletter essay alongside this podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode of Understanding Korea, one story at a time. 오늘도 들어주셔서 감사합니다. 다음에 만나요. Bye!